Hi class, it's Mrs. C. I am on my front porch and I'm going to read you some of our Harry Potter. It's really the only quiet place I could find in my house to read out loud to you guys. And it's another beautiful day, so I decided to take this time to read with my favorite people. So here I go. If I recall, we were on page 148 in chapter 8 of The Prisoner of Azkaban. And let's see what had happened. Scabbers and Crookshanks are constantly fighting, and Ron and Hermione are bickering and arguing about the relationship between the two pets. And it looks like they just came back from Transfiguration, and Harry was asking Professor McGonagall about possibly going to Hogsmeade, and that's where we kind of left off, so I will continue reading there. Lavender Brown seemed to be crying. Pavarti had her arm around her and was explaining something to Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, who were looking very serious. "What's the matter, Lavender?" said Hermione anxiously as she, Harry, and Ron went to join the group. "She got a letter home this morning," Pavarti whispered. "It's her rabbit, Binky. He's been killed by a fox." "Oh," said Hermione. "I'm sorry, Lavender." "I should have known," said Lavender tragically. "You know what day it is?" The 16th of October. That thing you're dreading? It will happen on the 16th of October. Remember, she was right. She was right. The whole class was gathered around Lavender now. Seamus shook his head seriously. Hermione hesitated. Then she said, You were dreading Binky being killed by a fox?" "Well, not necessarily by a fox," said Lavender, looking up at Hermione with streaming eyes. "But I was obviously dreading him dying, wasn't I?" "Oh," said Hermione. She paused again. Then, "Was Binky an old rabbit?" "No," Lavender sobbed. "He was only a baby." Pavarti tightened her arm around Lavender's shoulders. "But then, why would you dread him dying?" said Hermione. Pavarti glared at her. "Well, look at it logically," said Hermione, turning to the rest of the group. "I mean, Binky didn't even die today, did he? Lavender just got the news today." Lavender wailed loudly. "And she can't have been dreading it because it's come as a real shock." "Don't mind Hermione, Lavender," said Ron loudly. "She doesn't think other people's pets matter very much." Professor McGonagall opened the classroom door at that moment, which was perhaps lucky. Hermione and Ron were looking daggers at each other. And when they got into class, they seated themselves on either side of Harry and didn't talk to each other for the whole class. Harry still hadn't decided what he was going to say to Professor McGonagall when the bell rang at the end of the lesson, but it was she who brought up the subject of Hogsmeade first. "One moment, please," she called as the class made to leave. "As you're all in my house, you should hand Hogsmeade permission forms to me before Halloween. No form, no visiting the village. So don't forget." Neville put up his hand. "Please, Professor, I think I've lost—" "Your grandmother sent me yours directly, Longbottom," said Professor McGonagall. "She seemed to think it was safer." "Well, that's all. You may leave." "Ask her now," Ron hissed at Harry. "Oh, but—" "Go for it, Harry," Ron said stubbornly. Harry waited for the rest of the class to disappear, then headed nervously for Professor McGonagall's desk. "Yes, Potter?" Harry took a deep breath. Professor, my aunt and uncle, forgot to sign my form, he said. Professor McGonagall looked over his square spectacles at him, but she didn't say anything. So, do you think it'd be all right? I mean, will it be okay if I go to Hogsmeade? Professor McGonagall looked down and began shuffling papers on her desk. I'm afraid not, Potter, she said. You heard what I said. No form, no visiting the village. That's the rule. But, Professor, my aunt and uncle, you know, they're muggles. They don't really understand about Hogwarts forms and stuff, said Harry, while Ron egged him on with vigorous nods. If you said I could go... But I don't say so, said Professor McGonagall, standing up and piling her papers neatly into a drawer. The form clearly states that the parent or guardian must give permission. She turned to look at him with an odd expression on her face. Was it pity? I'm sorry, Potter, but that's my final word. You had better hurry, or you'll be late for your next lesson. There was nothing to be done. Ron called Professor McGonagall a lot of names that greatly annoyed Hermione. Hermione assumed an all-for-the-best expression that made Ron even angrier. And Harry had to endure everyone in class talking loudly and happily about what they were going to do first once they got into Hogsmeade. There's always the feast, said Ron in an effort to cheer Harry up. You know, the Halloween feast in the evening. Yeah, said Harry gloomily. Great. The Halloween feast was always good, but it would taste a lot better if he was coming to it after a day at Hogsmeade. Nothing anyone said made him feel any better about being left behind. Dean Thomas, who was good with the quill, had offered to forge Uncle Vernon's signature on the form. But as Harry had already told Professor McGonagall he hadn't had it signed, that was no good. Ron half-heartedly suggested the invisibility cloak, but Hermione stamped on that one, reminding Ron what Dumbledore had told him about the Dementors being able to see through them. Percy had what were possibly the least helpful words of comfort. They make a fuss about Hogsmeade, but I assure you, Harry, it's not all it's cracked up to be, he said seriously. All right, the sweet shop's rather good, and Zonko's joke shop's frankly dangerous, and yes, the Shrieking Shack's always worth a visit. But really, Harry, apart from that, you're not missing anything. On Halloween morning, Harry awoke with the rest and went down to breakfast, feeling thoroughly depressed, though doing his best to act normally. We'll bring you lots of sweets back from Honeydukes, said Hermione, looking desperately sorry for him. Yeah, loads, said Ron. He and Hermione had finally forgotten their squabble about Crookshanks in the face of Harry's difficulties. Don't worry about me, said Harry, in what he had hoped was an offhand voice. I'll see you at the feast. Have a good time. He accompanied them to the entrance hall where Filch, the caretaker, was standing inside the front doors, checking off names against a long list, peering suspiciously into every face, and making sure that no one was sneaking out who shouldn't be going. Staying here, Potter? Shouted Malfoy, who was standing in line with Crabbe and Goyle. Scared of passing the Dementors? Harry ignored him and made his solitary way up the marble staircase, through the deserted corridors, and back to Gryffindor Tower. Password? Said the fat lady, jerking out of a doze. Fortuna Major, said Harry listlessly. The portrait swung open, and he climbed through the hole into the common room. It was full of chattering first and second years, and a few older students who had obviously visited Hogsmeade so often the novelty had worn off. Harry! Harry! Hi, Harry! It was Colin Creevey, a second year who was deeply in awe of Harry and had never missed an opportunity to speak to him. Aren't you going to Hogsmeade, Harry? Why not? Hey! Colin looked eagerly around at his friends. You can come and sit with us if you like, Harry. No thanks, Colin, said Harry, who wasn't in the mood to have a lot of people staring avidly at the scar on his forehead. I've got to go to the library and get some work done. After that, he had no choice but to turn right around and head back out of the portrait hole again. "What was the point of waking me up?" said the fat lady, grumpily, after he walked away. Harry wandered dispiritedly toward the library, but halfway there he changed his mind. He didn't feel like working. He turned around and came face to face with Filch, who had obviously just seen off the last of the Hogsmeade visitors. "What are you doing?" Filch snarled suspiciously. "Nothing," said Harry truthfully. "Nothing?" spat Filch, his jowls quivering unpleasantly. "A likely story? Sneaking around on your own? Why aren't you in Hogsmeade buying stink pellets and belch powder and whizzing worms like the rest of your nasty little friends?" Harry shrugged. "Well, get back to your common room where you belong," snapped Filch, and he stood glaring until Harry passed out of sight. But Harry didn't go back to the common room. He climbed a staircase, thinking vaguely of visiting the owlery to see Hedwig, and was walking along another corridor when a voice from inside one of the rooms said, "Harry?" Harry doubled back to see who had spoken and met Professor Lupin looking around his office door. "What are you doing?" said Lupin, though in a very different voice from Filch. "Where are Ron and Hermione?" "Hogsmeade," said Harry in a would-be casual voice. "Ah," said Lupin. He considered Harry for a moment. "Why don't you come in? I've just taken a delivery of Grindylow for our next lesson." "A what?" said Harry. He followed Lupin into his office. In the corner stood a very large tank of water. A sickly green creature with sharp little horns had its face pressed against the glass, pulling faces and flexing its long, spindly fingers. "It's a water demon," said Lupin, surveying the Grindylow thoughtfully. "We shouldn't have much difficulty with him, not after the Kappas. The trick is to break its grip. You notice the abnormally long fingers? Strong, but very brittle." The Grindylow bared its green teeth and then buried itself in a tangle of weeds in the corner. "Cup of tea?" said Lupin, looking around for his kettle. "I was just thinking of making one." "All right," said Harry awkwardly. Lupin tapped the kettle with his wand, and a blast of steam issued suddenly from the spout. "Sit down," said Lupin, taking the lid off a dusty tin. "I've only got tea bags, I'm afraid, but I dare say you've had enough of tea leaves." Harry looked at him. Lupin's eyes were twinkling. "How do you know about that?" Harry asked. "Professor McGonagall told me," said Lupin, passing Harry a chipped mug of tea. "You're not worried, are you?" "No," said Harry. He thought for a moment of telling Lupin about the dog he'd seen in Magnolia Crescent, but decided not to. He didn't want Lupin to think he was a coward, especially since Lupin had already seemed to think he couldn't cope with a Bogart. Something of Harry's thoughts seemed to have shown on his face, because Lupin said, "Anything worrying you, Harry?" "No," Harry lied. He drank a bit of tea and watched the Grindylow brandishing a fist at him. "Yes," he said suddenly, putting his tea down on Lupin's desk. "You know the day we fought the Bogart?" "Yes," said Lupin slowly. "Why didn't you let me fight it?" said Harry abruptly. Lupin's eyebrows raised. "I would have thought that was obvious, Harry," he said, sounding surprised. Harry, who had expected Lupin to deny that he'd done any such thing, was taken aback. "Why?" he said again. "Well," said Lupin, frowning slightly, "I assumed that if the Bogart faced you, it would assume the shape of Lord Voldemort." Harry stared. Not only was this the last answer he'd expected, but Lupin said Voldemort's name. The only person Harry had ever heard say the name aloud, apart from himself, was Professor Dumbledore. "Clearly I was wrong," said Lupin, still frowning at Harry. "But I didn't think it was a good idea for Lord Voldemort to materialize in the staff room. I imagined people would panic. I didn't think of Voldemort, said Harry honestly. I remember those Dementors. I see, said Lupin thoughtfully. Well, I am impressed. He smiled slightly at the look of surprise on Harry's face. That suggests that what you fear most of all is fear. Very wise, Harry. Harry didn't know what else to say, so he drank some more tea. All right, I'm going to stop there for today, and I will read you more tomorrow. I miss you all very, very much, and I hope that everyone's doing well, and that you're getting some time to be outside, and that you're reading books on your own, and just overall doing well. All right, take care, you guys. Bye.